Welcome to Lumina, the House of Education. This podcast exists to make a difference. Here, real stories from classrooms, schools, and education systems are brought together to reshape what education is meant to be in modern times. We talk about leadership, responsibility, values, and the human side of learning. This is a space for education leaders who are done reacting and ready to lead. Let's begin.
Welcome. We are tackling a number today that is, well, truly staggering. A number that has reshaped American education from kindergarten all the way to university endowments.
It's huge.
We're talking about the $276 billion poured into the system during the pandemic, all through the Education Stabilization Fund.
And that figure represents an unprecedented emergency investment. I mean, it kept schools open. It kept institutions from just, falling into fiscal collapse.
Right.
And it provided really essential student support during one of the most volatile periods, in modern history.
Yeah.
The money came primarily through three major streams. You had ESSER for K-12, AREF for higher ed, and then this highly flexible GEER fund for governors.
And here's the critical pivot for what we're looking at today.
Yeah.
The aid has dried up. That $276 billion clock is finished ticking.
It's over.
So our mission is to explore the sources and really understand the structural challenges this temporary funding left behind. Because for every school district, every college across the U.S., financial decisions have just fundamentally shifted. They've gone from being a technical, an accounting task, to a profound moral choice about what to keep and what to cut.
It's a classic case. You have these temporary relief funds being used to create permanent costs. When we look at the scale, ESSER just dominated. It provided nearly $190 billion for K-12 schools.
Wow. Then
AREF added another $75 billion for higher education. So the immediate crisis was solved. But the debt for those structural changes is, it's coming due right now.
So let's start with the largest slice of that pie. K-12 and what everyone is now calling the ESSER hangover.
Mm-hmm.
When researchers first asked school leaders to rate the success of ESSER, the consensus was strikingly lukewarm.
Tepid is a good word for it.
Yeah.
Something in between successful and disastrous.
But we shouldn't dismiss the good it did, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
Had there been no relief, those pandemic-era enrollment drops, they would have triggered catastrophic layoffs, just politically impossible layoffs, right when schools were trying to figure out hybrid learning and, safely bring kids back.
So ESSER prevented that systemic collapse.
It did. And it also provided essential emergency supports. We're talking about things like internet hotspots, food assistance, direct supplies for vulnerable families, and homeless students.
So it's successful at stabilization, but the sources suggest there's some deep regret among leaders. They feel like they missed a historic chance to really fundamentally address the academic slide.
Yeah, that's right. The test scores, particularly for the bottom quartile of students, they continue to lag pretty severely. There's a worry they spent on logistics instead of direct, high-quality instructional recovery.
And that concern leads us right to the biggest structural consequence of ESSER, the one that is defining budget talks right now.
The staffing surge.
Okay, let's unpack this. Here's where the numbers get really surprising.
They do.
The sources show that districts added, well over 200,000 new positions?
That's right. Between the 2019-20 and the 2023-24 school years.
And this happened even as overall student enrollment was either falling or just stagnating across huge parts of the country. So more employees for fewer students.
And that ratio is where the problem lies. We dove into the source data on what those 200,000 positions actually were. And it wasn't a push to hire core classroom teachers.
It wasn't.
No. Only about 17% of those new roles were actual teaching positions. Another 18% were instructional aides.
Wait, so if that's 35% were teachers or aides, that means the remaining 65% were non-teaching roles?
Exactly, 65%.
So everything from new administrators, curriculum coordinators, specialized counselors, academic coaches.
All of it. 65% of that surge went into support roles.
Precisely. It was a huge build out of administrative and specialist capacity. And so the question you have to ask is, why?
Right.
Was this driven by what students actually needed instructionally, or was it just, the path of least resistance?
Well, think about it. You have a massive pot of money. It has to be spent quickly. And you're already facing a teacher shortage. So hiring a curriculum specialist, who's often easier to find than, say, a certified high school physics teacher.
Is the faster way to check the spending done box.
Exactly. It sounds like organizational inertia being funded by temporary money. You build out a structure that you don't actually need long term.
And this brings us to what the sources highlight as the core worry, this quality versus quantity trade-off.
And what's fascinating here is that many of those newly created, higher-paying, non-teaching positions, they were filled by promoting the strongest, most experienced teachers already in the system.
Ah, okay. So the district takes its best math teacher, the one who gets amazing results with struggling students, and promotes them to be the new math coach.
Or the STEM coordinator, yeah. Often with a nice pay bump funded by ESSER.
But then you have to replace that amazing teacher in the classroom.
Exactly. And amidst these chronic national teacher shortages, they were forced to hire from a much less competitive applicant pool. So the sources strongly suggest that this rapid, massive hiring effort, coupled with that internal promotion of top talent, it actually lowered the average teacher quality for the students who desperately needed stability and excellence.
So on paper, you get a shiny new math coach, which sounds great for equity. But the cost was losing your most effective classroom teacher, meaning thousands of students across the district spent their post-pandemic years with a less effective primary teacher.
It is a brutal systemic trade-off.
It is.
And now the budget reality is just slamming into districts. The ESSER money is finished. And they cannot afford this larger, better-paid workforce. These are permanent salaries that were paid for with a one-time grant.
So what are the consequences we're seeing play out right now?
It's a desperate scramble. Districts are already burning through their financial reserves, which is, fiscally dangerous. Some are being forced to raise fees on students for things like sports or transportation.
And I've seen others considering really unpopular measures like, reducing the number of school days? Consolidating schools?
Yes, and all these financial cuts consume a leader's time and attention. It pulls them away from focusing on academics.
Which leads to the next, and probably the most painful challenge, workforce reduction. We're looking at huge hiring freezes and, I assume, the likelihood of widespread layoffs.
That's right. And the critical open question is, what happens to those employees who were formerly strong teachers, the administrators, the specialists who moved out of the classroom?
Do they get let go or can they go back into the classroom?
Well, average teacher quality is hanging in the balance, because if they do return to teaching, that could be a net positive for instruction. But the sources warn that where districts resort to seniority-based layoffs, which is still the default in many places,
The disruptions will hit high-poverty schools the hardest.
disproportionately, because those schools often rely on newer, excellent teachers who have less job protection. The newest talent, often the most diverse talent, is the first to go.
So figuring out the long-term impact of this ESSER-triggered financial mess and the effect on teacher quality, that's going to take researchers years.
Years. But the pain is being felt right now.
Okay, so if K-12 is wrestling with this staffing hangover, let's shift to higher education. It seems like they managed the initial stabilization, but are now facing a new and different wave of uncertainty.
Yeah, higher ed was hit really hard by the pandemic's turbulence. Students reported huge disruptions. I think it was nearly 75% reported increased stress or anxiety. Many faced immediate needs, difficulty paying for housing, food, getting access to technology.
And that's where the $75 billion Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or HERF, came in.
Right. It was designed to stabilize both the students and the institutions themselves who are facing these big budget shortfalls.
And the structure of HERF was really interesting because it had this built-in requirement for student support.
Yes, a really important one. Institutions were required to allocate fully 50% of their HERF funds directly to students as emergency aid grants.
And did that work? Was it targeted well?
The sources show it was largely successful. About 63% of those emergency grants went to Pell recipients, so students with demonstrated financial need. And those students got larger average grants than their peers. It was very effective at funneling money to the students who needed it most.
Okay, so the student aid half was a success. How did the institutions spend the other half, the operational budget?
They focused heavily on staff continuity and maintaining services. So 79% of institutions reported spending ANERF funds on things like COVID-19 screenings, healthcare, sanitation.
And keeping people employed.
Crucially, yes. 70% used the aid to avoid layoffs and continue offering vital student support programs like advising and mental health services right when students needed them the most.
It sounds like stabilization in the purest sense. But then we have this other fund, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEER Fund, a smaller what, $4.3 billion?
Yeah, but it offered this unique opportunity to see state-level discretion in action. Okay, let's unpack this. GRR gave governors immense power with very minimal federal guidance on how to split the money between K-12 and higher ed.
And the result was?
Dramatic, fascinating variation across the country.
Give us an example of that. What does that political discretion actually look like on the ground?
Well, look at Texas and California, two of the largest states, right? Both of them allocated 100% of their GR funds to K-12 schools.
100%.
They basically treated it as an extension of ESSER. They prioritized basic schooling needs. But then you have states like Kansas and New Jersey, and they allocated 100% to higher education.
So if you were a university president in New Jersey, you got a significant influx of state-controlled emergency funding. If you were in California, you had to rely almost entirely on the federal HARF money.
That's the policy takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
State-level choices led to these massive differences in the total relief available to colleges. And our analysis finds that when colleges first got GR, they spent it defensively on staff, distance learning upgrades, mental health.
Mm-hmm.
But as more federal aid arrived, they shifted those later GR funds towards student basic needs and direct financial aid.
And despite all this turbulence, the federal investment seems to have genuinely paid off in stabilizing the college sector. We actually have some really positive metrics to report.
We do. Undergraduate enrollment finally surpassed pre-pandemic levels in the fall of 2024. More importantly, the proportion of students who persisted, who came back for their second year of college, is at its highest point in the last decade. It hit around 77%.
That's a great sign. And what about graduation?
6-year completion rates reached about 61%, which is significant. And what's really driving that growth is major improvement in the 2-year sector, community colleges.
Which are often the entry point for the most vulnerable students.
Exactly. Your off definitely helped keep those students enrolled and on track to finish.
So, stabilization achieved. But now the sources point to a new financial cloud hanging over higher education, one that has nothing to do with the pandemic's immediate aftermath.
No, it's fiscal uncertainty driven by potential federal policy changes. A lot of colleges have frozen hiring or even graduate school admissions. They're worried about attempts at widespread cuts to federal research funding, which is a massive revenue stream for those big research universities.
And colleges have traditionally had their go-to strategies to raise revenue quickly, right?
Well, they have. They've historically turned to rapidly expanding master's degree programs, which are often cash cows, or aggressively recruiting international students who pay higher tuition.
But those are now threatened.
Well, the sources highlight that proposed policies to restrict graduate borrowing and potential changes to immigration policies, they are threatening the reliability of both of those crucial revenue streams. So colleges are being forced to rethink their entire long-term financial model.
Which brings us to the synthesis, the critical takeaway. What does all this massive economic injection and the hangover that followed, what does it mean for the people actually running these systems?
The pressures we've talked about, the ESSER staffing crisis in K-12, and the policy uncertainty in higher ed, they've created a fundamental shift in leadership identity.
How so?
Well, 10 years ago, the job of a superintendent was primarily defined by instruction, curriculum, maybe community relations. Today, the sources reveal that the job is defined by one thing: the budget.
And not just in a philosophical sense.
Oh, no. Money now touches every single lever of the system. The budget dictates instructional strategy, staffing, technology. Leaders are spending enormous amounts of time not on how to teach, but on how to pay for who is teaching.
And this moment feels different because of the lack of flexibility. It's not just a general recession. Commitments made with that one-time money, the larger workforce in K-12, the expanded student services in higher ed, they remain, but the funding is gone. There's no easy way out.
This is why we argue that budget decisions are no longer technical. They are deeply moral.
Right.
When a leader is facing a 10% budget deficit, every line item has a face behind it. Cutting a math coach means firing a person who is a high-performing teacher. Cutting a specialized program means removing a lifeline for vulnerable students.
So the spreadsheet is literally dictating values, what gets prioritized.
Exactly. And the sources strongly stress the danger of delay. Districts that wait, maybe hoping enrollment will magically surge or state funding will appear, they often end up making worse decisions later under intense public pressure and scrutiny.
It sounds like real leadership now is just defined by facing this reality head on.
It is about choosing which core values you protect. Is it stability for your staff, program quality for your students, a healthy financial reserve? Because you simply can't protect everything at once anymore.
This is the quiet truth of education leadership right now. The budget has become the system itself. The financial structure isn't just a support function, it's the core operational driver.
And the question for institutions across both K-12 and higher ed is not if they will change. It's whether they manage to change deliberately, guided by their mission, or reactively under conditions of financial collapse.
So we've explored this massive $276 billion intervention and the budget hangover that's followed. The key takeaways feel pretty stark. For K-12, it's grappling with this huge staffing mismatch, where adding over 200,000 positions, mostly non-teaching, now risks lowering overall teacher quality.
Meanwhile, higher ed stabilized its students and systems remarkably well because of HERF. That led to record persistence and completion rates. But now it faces this new era of fiscal uncertainty driven by federal policy proposals that affect these really crucial revenue streams.
Right. Research funding, graduate student enrollment.
The financial system now dictates educational strategy more than ever before.
So what stands out to you as the biggest long-term implication of using temporary money to fund permanent labor costs across this whole landscape?
The parallel between the sectors is what's really striking to me. In K-12, they funded permanent staff with temporary ESSER cash. In higher ed, they're increasingly relying on these vulnerable, non-core revenue streams, like master's students or international enrollment, which could be wiped out by a policy shift to cover permanent operating expenses. This raises a crucial question about institutional health. Is the education system at every single level structurally reliant on financial strategies that are just not sustainable? That lack of structural sustainability, that is the challenge leaders will be reckoning with for the next decade.
Education doesn't change through slogans. It changes when leaders are willing to look again at what really matters. If this episode raised a question worth sitting with, then it did its job. This is Lumina, the House of Education. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow.